For those looking to automate your local testing workflows, this video is perfect for you. And even if not, this is the only dependency you'll ever need to install, at least manually. Nox, which is a tool we're looking at today, works by creating sessions and virtual environments to help automate processes for you. You could define a series of operations as code in a configuration file and then run them using a single command in the command line. As Nox can manage virtual environments on its own, you don't actually need all your development dependencies or even potentially runtime dependencies, depending on how you set it up, in your local environment. And so you can get away with a super clean workflow. In this video, we're going to be looking at a lot of the different options that Nox has to offer, as well as how to create and manage sessions. Of course, if you find this video helpful at any point, then consider leaving a like to let me know, and maybe subscribe if you want to see more videos like this. If you want to see new videos before anyone else, you can become a member using the join button below. With all that out of the way, let's take a look at what Nox is all about. On the screen right now is a pretty horrendous bit of code that will say hello to whoever we tell it to say hello to. This is intentionally this bad as we're going to be formatting it using Nox. So to start with Nox, we just need to pip install Nox, and I already have it installed. Version 2024.10.9 is the version I'm using. And then to create our sessions, as I said in the intro, Nox runs a load of sessions for automated testing. We need to create our Nox file.py in the sidebar down here. There's probably a way to call it whatever you want if you had some sort of configuration file somewhere. I don't see a point in doing that, so we're just going to call it Nox file.py. And then you just import Nox like that, and then to create a session, you create a function decorated with Nox.session like that. So our function is going to be format, and it's actually going to take session, which will be a type Nox.session, and it will return none. And this will be run when the session is run. And this session object can be used to do a number of things, notably installing packages and running commands, which is what we're going to be doing here. So we want to do session.install, not comma, install black like that. And this will just install the latest version of black. You could do 24.1 if you were so inclined. We don't want to do that. And then once we've installed it, it will do session.run black, and then we'll just give it the current path. So what this is doing, it's quite a simple bit of code, but there's quite a lot going on. So this Nox.session will first create a virtual environment that everything will be running. It then passes the session object to our function that we can use. When we install something, it will install in the virtual environment that Nox has created. So you'll note, if I go back to pip list, that installs a number of things, but black is not one of them. And keep that in mind. So install it in there, and then it will run a command using that virtual environment, in our case, black dot. And then to actually run the session, all we need to do is just run Nox, and it'll run all the sessions that are in our file. We just have the one. You see, creating virtual environment using Python Nox format, and Python-m pip install black, and then black dot, and it's reformatted our code. So it's reformatted this, but more notably, it's reformatted this as well. And apparently that's acceptable according to black. But this is a lot nicer to look at now. And it's actually worked. And if we go pip list again, we'll see that black is not here. So this is how Nox can be used to run all these virtual environments, run all these commands without actually having to get the user to install all of these things. For the most part, that is the basics of how Nox works. I do want to run through some options with sessions, so you can have this as a parametrized decorator. And inside here, you can provide a series of options. I'm only going to talk about a few of them that I find particularly useful or particularly notable, I guess. The first one being the Python keyword argument. So here you can provide a list or a tuple or whatever of Python versions to run this session with. So say if you wanted to run it on the minimum supported version of Python, which says 3.10, and then you have 3.13 as well. And if you wanted to, you can run it on PyPy 2, but you have to use PyPy and then the PyPy version and not the Python version specifically. And this will use any interpreters that are installed locally on your system to run this, and it will iteratively go through and run it. So if I run Nox again, we'll get format 3.10, and this will actually error for me because I manage my Python versions using venv. So this will be less useful if you want to manage your versions using that. I personally would just recommend sticking with what you've got locally and then telling the CI to do all this. But if you did want to do all this locally using Nox, then you could if you weren't already in a virtual environment like I am. So I'm just going to comment that out for now. But I did want to show that off anyway because I did use that for a while. And if you're not using CI and you are using global Python and you want to use Nox to manage your virtual environments, that's a really cool thing to have. Just make sure the interpreter is actually installed because Nox won't do that for you. The next option I want to talk about is reuse venv. And we're going to set this to true. So by default, Nox will recreate the virtual environment every single time a session is run. If you don't want this to happen, then you can use reuse venv equals true to make it reuse the virtual environment. You might want to make sure, if you're doing this, that it does upgrade any packages, especially if you're using a requirements file and something has changed, otherwise it won't do that. But allowing you to do this will cut down on the session time because it won't need to recreate the environment, and it probably won't need to reinstall absolutely everything. So if you run this again, we'll see that it runs a lot quicker because it's just reusing the existing one and it doesn't need to do any installations of Black. If we didn't have this, it would need to recreate the environment, run the pip install again, and you'll see we go from having no time at all stated because the command didn't take long enough to it taking 6 seconds. So that's the way you can save on time. So we'll leave that on. I use that all the time. The other really useful one that I didn't actually know until I started researching this video is venv backend. So you can actually change the backend that is used to create virtual environments. So virtual env is the one that it uses by default. I believe it installs this. This is the third-party one. If you didn't want to use the third-party one, you could use venv like that and it would use that. Or if you have UV installed, you can actually get it to create the virtual environment using UV instead. So if we uncomment it out so it recreates the virtual environment, we've now got a virtual environment created using UV, and you'll notice how much quicker that actually was to create the venv because UV is a lot faster than this. If you really liked UV and you wanted to take advantage of its speed and everything, but maybe others on your team aren't so big fans or don't have it, or maybe it's just a public package and you don't really want to expect everyone to have UV installed, you can provide a series of venv backends for which Nox will use the first available one. So you could do this. So now Nox will use UV if it's available, and if it's not available, it will use virtual env instead. And this means that you can benefit from UV's extra speed, but people that don't have UV for whatever reason can just use virtual env and get away with it just fine that way. If you had multiple sessions, so say we had this session down here that was nox.session and it was called def don't run. Took a session that was of type nox.session, actually get the syntax for that correct, and it was none, and then we just passed it for now. By default, if you run Nox like this, Nox will run every session in the file. You might not want it to do that. So if there are sessions that are destructive, so maybe they have, or maybe they actually do formatting and you don't want them to run by default and you want to turn them off, there is a way you can do that. And you can do that by doing nox.options.sessions equals, and we'll say format here. And this will be a list of sessions that you do actually want Nox to run by default. So now that we've set this, we just want format to run and only format will run. We can get don't run to run manually by doing nox-s don't run. And now it's not going to do anything because I've just passed it, but we see that the session was actually run. So you can have sessions in here that are run manually, but not automatically by using this options.sessions up here. And that's also a good way of running individual sessions. So if you just wanted to format, or you just wanted to lint, or just wanted to test without running everything else, then you could do nox-s and then the session name, and then it will just run that session. You can also pass multiple sessions to -s, so you could do -s format don't run, and it will run both of them. So if you wanted to do linting and testing, then you could do that too. The final thing that I want to show off is parameterization, which is actually another thing I didn't know about until researching for this video. I've been using Nox for years, and there's things I didn't know. So if we use this don't run session here, since it's here, we could do nox.parameterize, and we can set a parameter name, say version, and this is really good for running a single session across multiple versions of a library. So say, for example, we wanted to install 3 different versions of a library and then test that everything worked with all those versions. So we'll do 5.3.0, 5.2.1, and then 5.1.1. And these are the 3 latest patch versions for each of these individual minor versions of the library that I'm going to be using. And you pass a list in here, and then you pass version in here. So version will be a string in our case. And this will be very familiar to you if you use pyro-test. We can do session.install, and then analytics is the version these version numbers, or analytics is the package that these version numbers correspond to. And then we have version here like that. And this will take the version string and actually install that specific version. And if we do session.run, and then instead of doing an actual test, we're just going to do python-m analytics, because this will give us version reporting. And if we run this, so it'd be nox-s don't run, we get an individual session run for each of these versions. And we can see once it's all done, if I go up to the top, that this session reports version 5.3. This session reports version 5.2.1, and this one version 5.1.1. So that's how you can have a session that does the same thing, just with slightly different parameters. The original plan for this video was to go through all this as an illustrative example and then spend an amount of time going over a real world example. The video is getting quite long. I spent longer than I thought explaining all that. We will still look at the real world example, which is this, which incredibly is actually analytics. I say incredibly, it's not a coincidence at all. I use this project for everywhere I really can, because it's the project that I've spent the most time with in the real world, and as such I've kind of done a lot of the stuff I talk about on the channel here. But we're just going to kind of quickly scan this, and I'll leave the file, a link to the file in the description for those that want to have a look at it. But this one, yeah, this one goes into quite some way. So we have tests here. So we run pytest in this session with log level 1 coverage, and then the specific coverage. We now have dependency checking, formatting, which runs black with the check. With analytics, I took the opinion that sessions shouldn't make any changes. That was a long time ago, and I'm wondering now whether or not that was the best call, really, about whether or not it'd be better to just have it format. But, you know, I took that opinion at the time. There's also a licensing check in here just to make sure that every file has the license. There's linting, so this uses rough specifically. I think this uses an old version if it's still using rough check. It does slots check, code spell, and mypy as well. It checks all the types. And you'll see this install decorator as well. This is a custom decorator that installs things out of this down here, or specifically out of nox.txt. So I have different sections defined by comments in this nox.txt. And basically, this install directory takes Meta installs analytics itself. R files is like the section. So where's an example of that? Is there an example of that? Yeah, here we go. So base, that installs the base here as well. Is it? Oh, it's done by the test name, I think. Oh god, yeah, it's done by the test name, I think. Which section it installs? Yeah, it's it's quite a complicated one, but this does all the installation for us. So we pass the session into the wrapper, and then we go through all this. Again, I'll leave it in the description. I don't want to spend too long talking about it right now because that's a bit more complicated. But I wanted to show that example off as a real world example. I do like showing real world examples because they tend to be very descriptive about how you can use these things, and show off some really cool use cases that an illustrative example might not go into. Let me know in the comments if you have any projects that can benefit from using Nox. I really, really love it, and I actually prefer it to Tox. I haven't used Tox in anger, but Nox it just looks so much easier to use from all the examples and everything. Also, let me know if you have any questions. I know there was a lot of information in a short period of time, so don't be afraid to put any questions down in the comments if you have them. If you want to see other ways that you can make your Python code as perfect as possible, you can check out the Perfect Python series using the card in the end cards, or the end screen, like the clicky bit. That was smoother than I intended. And I will see you in the next video for whatever we do next.